All right, so recently I was talking to one of my friends at work, and he was asking me a bunch of questions about the ego and the nature of the ego and how the ego isn't who we are. And he was sort of inquiring about that because he didn't seem to understand it. So I was thinking about that conversation, and I remembered there were quite a few interesting talking points that I wanted to share on a video to you guys. So let's get into it. I'm going to break down what the ego is, and I'm going to break down how it slyly tries to control your life in ways that you don't want it to. Okay, so let's first of all get into what the ego actually is. So we are we are not just evolved monkeys, okay? There's so much more to reality than that. A lot of people think that we're just evolved monkeys with bigger brains and a larger capacity to understand and learn things, but that's not solely the case, okay? We are, in essence, we are two separate beings combined into one, okay? We have infinite consciousness, right? Contained in a mortal in a mortal shell, okay? What does this mean? Essentially, we are a fractal of an infinite universal intelligence that has created everything in existence, okay? Everything that you can see, smell, touch, hear, taste, feel, everything is a different form of the same thing, okay? It's the same thing expressing itself in different unique forms. We are one of these expressions. We humans are one of these unique expressions, okay? We are infinite consciousness expressing itself as intelligent primates, yeah? So what does this mean? This means on the outside, right, we are intelligent primates, right? We are contained in a mortal shell. That mortal shell is our human body, okay, with its human capacities, yeah? But in essence, we come from an infinite consciousness, okay? Now, what does this mean in regards to the ego? So the ego is the identity that is created by that mortal shell. Because remember, we're just intelligent monkeys, right? So with that intelligence, yeah, when we gain consciousness and self-awareness and orientation in the world, right? We start labeling things and we start labeling ourselves and we start identifying with different parts of ourselves and the world, right? And we attach that to a fabricated identity that we call the ego, okay? So the ego is created by the mortal shell, right? It's largely inferior to the infinite consciousness because the infinite consciousness is infinite. It's everything. The ego is finite, okay? It has boundaries. It's an identity with a criteria. Infinite consciousness doesn't have a criteria to identify with because it's everything, right? So this fabricated finite identity is the ego. Now, a good way to think about it is when you compare children to adults, right? An adult is usually a lot more stressed, under pressure, anxious, depressed, um, you know, stressed overall than a child. And the reason this is because when we're young children, right, we haven't created an ego yet. Okay, we don't know enough about ourselves and the world to formulate a fabricated identity, right? We don't have that need yet because we don't understand things in a way that is required for us to then create an identity. As children, we're just one with everything. We don't label stuff. We just live and we just connect with everything effortlessly, and we live through our imagination. We see the world how we want to see it, right? That's why we start playing with sticks and stones, and there's no derogatory thinking patterns and like racism and sexism and there's none of that when you're a kid, right? Because we don't have an ego yet. We don't have something that we say, this is who I am and that's who I'm not, and therefore I don't align myself with that. Do you know what I mean? So that's a good way to understand what the ego is. Now, I then began talking to my friend at work about a recent experience that he had that was negative, and he was telling me about it, and I quickly realized that he had this negative experience because of his attachment to his ego, and because he allowed his ego to subconsciously manipulate his life, right? So the situation was essentially he was he was afraid to go to a specific place. He was anxious about going to this place with these people because he didn't know what to expect, and he was worried that the people had changed because he hadn't seen them for a long time, and he just overall was anxious about attending this event. And I told him that the ego was the root cause of it, and the reason for this is because the ego likes to do these things. Okay, the first one is seek comfort at all times. Okay, at all times your ego wants to be comfortable. Okay, another thing is your ego likes to be in control, which is kind of similar to the first one but slightly different at the same time. Your ego always wants to be in control. Your ego cannot stand doing something where it has to give up control of the situation. Yeah, and lastly, your ego wants to be able to predict things correctly. Your ego wants to be able to predict things correctly. Your ego, they're all very similar, but it sort of paints the picture a little bit. Your ego just wants to be in control of everything. It wants to be right all the time, and it wants to be comfortable all the time. The reason he ended up being anxious about this thing is because ultimately, yeah, this thing was fear of the unknown. Yeah, he was scared of the situation because he couldn't predict it. He had no idea what he was stepping into, right? And so his ego began screaming at him like, you don't know what's going to happen. It could go wrong. What if it's not comfortable? What if it's not a comfortable situation that you're putting yourself in? Like, I have no idea what's going on. Why would you put yourself in that situation? But ultimately, I told him, I said, realize, yeah, that as soon as you allow your ego to dictate the things that you do, right, you are disqualifying infinite potential for positive experiences, because you're always going to be allowing yourself to seek comfort and control and predictability, and in that there's no growth, there's no evolution, there's no possibility of experiencing something new and profound. Do you understand? So I broke that down to him, and he said, oh, that makes so much sense. Do you know, that makes so much sense. And so this kind of led me to just talking to him a little bit about what he wants to do with his life and why he hasn't done those things yet. And we kind of just began talking about how, like, most of the time when you don't allow yourself to make progress in things, it's because you are scared of the unknown. And the reason you are scared of the unknown is because you have an ego telling you that I can't be in control if you go through with this. Does that make sense? So like, if there's anything that you want to do with your life, right? Anything, yeah? You have to understand that you're doing something that you've never done before, right? And you're doing something that you can't predict. All you know is that it's the way to get to your goal, okay? And you have to be able to catch your ego out, because your ego is going to make it really, really, really difficult for you to follow through with these ambitions that you've got. Because in following through with them, you're doing something that you've never done and you can't predict, and your ego can't stand that. But one thing that you have to understand is that there's only really two options, okay? You either stay comfortable, or you take a risk and you do something that you've never done before, and you throw yourself into the unknown, right? And a lot of people, and I used to be like this as well, a lot of people, they get really, really, really comfortable in being mediocre, right? They get really comfortable in being average and a nobody, right? Because it satisfies the ego. Like, an average person is so predictable, and an average person, they don't do much other than go to work, maybe go out on the weekend with the same group of friends, and eat the same shitty foods and engage in the same pointless hobbies like playing video games and watching TV in all their spare time, right? But the ego loves this behavior. The ego loves it because it's so comfortable and it's so like numbing. Yeah, it's exactly where your ego wants to be. But your higher mind, your higher mind wants to evolve. Your higher mind wants to put your ego to the side and try and take yourself as far as it possibly can, right? And you have to be able to find that voice in your head and not give in to your ego, okay? You need to be able to find the voice in your head that's yearning for growth and productivity and connection with new people and new opportunities and you know, more money and more love and more abundance. There's always a voice in your head telling you to seek those things, okay? Because in nature we are unlimited beings. We have the capacity to do whatever we want in life. Like anything you put your mind to, you can achieve. So there's always a voice in your head telling you to strive for more, okay? But most people, they give into the ego and they allow their ego to dictate their whole lives. And then they get to 60, 70, 80 years old and they think, holy shit, why did I not strive for more? Why? You know, and you don't want to be in that situation. It's one of my biggest fears, is looking back on my life and not being satisfied with the situations that I put myself in. So yeah, I hope that inspired something in you guys, because my friend, he seemed to enjoy the conversation that we had. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video.